So yeah, Tom, I went and saw Jordan Peterson. You can't not know about him if you're in the personal development world. You just said you read his first book, right? Uh,
12 Rules for Life or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. You read it and you liked it.
Yeah, I liked it. I love his research, analytical validation,
Yeah.
validating confirmation stuff around it. I know he's controversial. My favorite chapter in his book was about um, raising your kids. It just really struck me very similar to what Dad would talk about.
Yeah.
And so I like that.
Well, he obviously lines up with a lot. So but this is not a pro. He is not the point, but it is a point of something that his talk. So I was given a ticket. Actually, I wasn't. Randy was. Dr. Randy James, our doctor, was given 2 tickets by a friend, and he said, "Hey, we're going on a date." So we went out and had some food and went and saw it. And I was just curious as to, in this day and age, it's to me, it seems a little odd to have somebody on stage giving a monologue. He's just going, I mean, he has a podcast, he has YouTube. I mean, you can listen to this from the comfort of your own home for free. And people were paying $40 to $200, or I think it was more than that even, to go see him. And it was a packed house, 1,500 people or so. And he just did a monologue, just talked, and he's billed as the intellectual phenomenon. And I can't do that. I don't have that kind of a mind to just sit up there and talk without notes, without anything. And he's just talking. He's not rehearsed really. It's just, it was interesting. So yeah, you read the first book. I have got it too. I got it on the bookshelf behind me. His new one is Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. His first chapter is, and this is what he was going to cover yesterday: do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievement. That was the second part. He never got to the second part. Never got to, they just ran out of time. He didn't even touch creative achievement. So it's denigrate social institutions. And it wasn't this morning. It was a couple of days ago. I saw you post. No, it wasn't you. It was somebody, a friend of yours. I thought I wrote their name down, but somebody posted on your Facebook page a picture they took of you and your dad, of Zig. And the caption, I think it's a poster in your office or something, says, "The way you see people is the way you treat them." And that was really the essence, because he's talking about, it was kind of like, be careful how you denigrate social institutions. And really it was those that you see in power. So how we're so quick, where we are right now, Tom, in the culture, to point and cry foul for this power, this oppressor, this institution, and how they're wrong and evil and bully and bad and whatever. And he says, it doesn't really pan out. It doesn't really pan out. If you're really that bad. And then he did just what you talked about. He cited these studies of rats, of monkeys, I think, and then of people. And basically, and then I'll lob it at you, basically saying, look, if you have somebody who's a total, complete bully, a psychopath, whatever, so 100% just leading with power, oppression, whatever, it doesn't work out for them socially. They get ostracized. So it's really, cutting off their nose to spite their face. It doesn't work out. There has to be, and then he did cite this really interesting scenario with rats, like a bigger rat and a smaller rat, and the bigger rat, uses its power. But if it uses it too much, the smaller rat will never engage with it again, and it loses a companion, a friend. There's got to be, he said, in that scenario with rats, at least 30% reciprocity. And so he's talking about all this to say, look, if we look out there at all these things we're pointing at, whether it's a person of influence and power, an institution, and saying that they're just all evil, he says it doesn't really the math doesn't work, that there's not some reciprocity, something that they're providing. And it was really just a caution towards our attitude. And so to bring that back to, my concern was, how am I? How is my family? How is my culture? How are we, to some degree, claiming victimization? What's our attitude, and how is that affecting us? And that brings us back to kind of the termites of your analogy. How is that impacting us? So that's what Rain and I spent the evening afterwards talking about. Gosh, how is this not just as a theory out there, but how does this impact me, Kevin? How's it impact Tom? How's it impact our audience?
Yeah. So I'm kind of jealous. I would have liked to have been there. I can say straight up, I think there's some paths he goes down that I'm unsure of. I'm not quite
Agreed.
as schooled and
Yeah.
educated. And I think the reason he can do a monologue is probably because he's been attacked on every point he makes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to see. And, G.K. Chesterton,
Mm-hmm.
who 100 years ago was probably the most intellectual giant of all in his realm, he has a quote that says, don't take a fence post down until you know why it was there in the first place.
Hmm.
And our culture, and it's not a new thing, it's been going on for decades, this idea of we should remove all boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
constructs, boundaries, power, social order, all the things that we've put in place are wrong or bad or should be defeated. And
they're unjust is what I feel like I keep hearing.
Yeah. And
To somebody, which they are going to be by proxy. Somehow it can't be fair to everybody.
And so I love the old, not old necessarily, but the like epic movies like Braveheart or Tolkien, and they can show you like the complete evilness and degradation of man, right? And they can show you what the heart is capable of in the worst sense. And so we're seeing it lived out. We're seeing the ultimate bully on the biggest stage on the globe, in the Ukraine with Putin being a bully and showing us what a depraved worldview and mindset can do. I mean, how many millions of people have been injured and hurt directly because of those actions? It's kind of incomprehensible.
Mm-hmm.
And and so that creates a real cultural challenge, because if you follow liberal progressivism to its end, it's people are basically good and they will do things that are good for each other. And so removing of barriers and structure is a great thing, because we're all going to end up doing good for each other. And so then we get to that foundational reality, and that is that, you've probably heard the term sheepdogs, and wolves. And so there's a certain percentage of the population that are wolves. They prey on other people, right? And they got sharp teeth and they're vicious and they take what's theirs and they're the bully, and life is about serving them, and they have a relentless pursuit of power and all that means. And then there's sheep, and this is the majority. And this isn't positive or negative. It's just that, hey, you know what? Most people, they love their family, they like their life, they want order, they want things to be in their place, and they don't want to live in fear. But they've got to have sheepdogs to guard them against the wolves.
Yeah.
And the problem is when you look out and you see a sheepdog, they look like a wolf. They've got sharp teeth and the ability to be a warrior and create incredible physical damage when necessary to protect the sheep.
Yeah.
And the difference between a sheep and a sheepdog is the heart, the motive, the moral standard, the code, the higher standard they submit themselves to. But sheep don't really like wolves or sheepdogs because both of them scare them. It's so, and so that's what it's about. And if sheepdogs abuse their power, I agree with what you were talking about. If there's not reciprocity, eventually the sheep outnumber them and overturn them.
Yeah.
And then they usually get the power vacuum usually gets filled by a wolf that sounds like a savior.
Mhm.
And then there's worse abuse. And then you've got to have a sheepdog come in who's willing to stand up to the wolf, but has a moral backbone and has, mercy and grace and justice and all those things all mixed into that bag. So it's a hard thing to get our heads around.
It is. And it's one of the things that he posited was that stuck out to me too, because I mean, Tom, you've seen wolves, you have met wolves, you might have even ended up in business deals with some of them. I mean, but you've seen them and you've seen that there's hurt and damage. And this doesn't take away from that. So it doesn't take away from that hurt and damage and the danger that can be there, but somehow and it's not even looking to have grace for them necessarily, but just kind of what, the old scripture from Romans 12:19, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Okay. So that's from a faith-based standpoint. Whether you align with that or not, have you ever known a wolf like that? And things really worked out for them. They were really a success. It worked. They got away with it. That's what he talked about. Have you ever known somebody and they really did? And at the end of the day, it worked out. They're successful. They're happy. They're fulfilled. They're at peace. I've just never experienced that. Not in the movies, not in real life. It didn't work for Hitler or Stalin. And you talked about some of the movies, and there's some that I've seen even recently where there is the very tangible, very blatant good and bad people opposing each other. And the beauty of the story is as they get into it and really get into the lives and the relationships and the realities, you kind of get to a point of going, wait a minute, who is bad and who is good? Because at the heart, like what you said, and Jordan did come back to this, pretty much everybody has good in them. They have a good intent. There's very few people really out to use power to oppress other people, to steal and maim and rape and pillage and whatnot. He even talked about psychopaths. That would be like an absolute, somebody who has no empathy. And he says, they don't grow. If that was the winning formula, we would see that grow. We would see more psychopaths. All of a sudden, man, that's the way to win. That's the way to get everything you want. We'd have 95% of the world gravitating towards that perspective, but we don't. Like kind of what you said about the wolves, we keep them in check. You get too many psychopaths out there going nuts and they're going to get stomped down. He literally said that. So just what you said, Tom, it'll get stomped down, and they waver at a very low percentage of the culture because we're not going to stand for that. And so do they really, and he did put that, it was kind of a funny moment in the talk. He said, but has it, if you feel like, oh my, you're upset about this, somebody who's using power, they are enforcing themselves upon you, and you feel upset at their success. He said, I question your view of success. I really kind of stopped the crowd a little bit. What is your view? If that is success, because, go back to what I said, are they really? I mean, is that the success you and I want? Would you be happy? Would everybody out there be happy with whatever your view of success is, to get it at the strong arm of power and oppression? I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think most of the wolves doing that want that. It may just be all that they know. It's the hand that they were dealt in some way. But to bring this back again tangibly, as it's not just a theoretical conversation, I'm thinking about how does this, your perspective, how is the termite of how I feel about my own victimization, my own control? Do I feel controlled by these powers? Do I feel like they're evil? Do I feel like corporate America or capitalism or the government or the other political party is by proxy, because I feel like I'm right over here, they're wrong, and they are out to harm me? And he just, that was, again, go back to, this is the chapter 1 beginning of his book, was do not carelessly denigrate social institutions. Okay, but I'm going to give that was the umbrella, social institutions, power. Basically the wielding of power that we rely on to some degrees. Do not carelessly denigrate them. And that's where he took us in and took us to these studies. That if you really feel like it's just power and oppression, that just doesn't really line up. Again, the math doesn't really work if they were really that awful. And I don't think it was an effort to give them a free pass and to make the rights wrong. It was more so just about our spirit. He didn't even say it that blatantly, but if Randy and I afterwards are trying to extrapolate, okay, what was his primary point? That was really it. It was just to watch your own attitude. And it reminded me of our, Shaunti Feldhahn and kindness. Being kind to others helps us more than it helps them. We're the greatest beneficiaries. How are we perceiving? And that, Tom, we've got a lot of people who we respect and revere, and align with on faith and values, who are struggling right now with their own spirit and attitudes about what's going on, and having to keep those in check, because man, it just takes you down a bad road and then you're minimized and compromised, and that's not helping us.
Yep. There's a couple of issues that I reflect on regularly. I'll set it up with this Rabbi Daniel Lapid example.
We need to get him back on the show. We talk about him constantly.
I know. He says in general, there's two types of people in the world. There's cake people and candle people. And cake people look at the world and they feel like they've been given a slice of cake. And that's their lot in life. And they look around, and if somebody has a bigger piece than they do, then that person got some of their cake.
Yeah. It's a zero. You're talking in essence, a zero-sum game as opposed to a win-win.
Yeah.
Which I literally just did a little research on that. I got how people think so often of that kind of a scarcity mentality. If I give something to you, I lost it, you got it. That's it.
Right. And it's a deep rooted cultural thing. So agrarian societies where wealth equaled land. If you owned the land, you had wealth. And if you didn't own the land, you were poor. You had to work for the landowner. And
there were lords. Yeah.
Yeah. And there were things put in place to keep, you in your place so that you couldn't advance. Candle people are the ones who their candle is lit and they know how to solve a problem. And so what they do is they look at life as serving other people. So to me, solving people's problems and serving other people, those are really the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so what they do is they go find somebody who's got a problem and they say, can I help you with your problem? And they say, yes. And so they take their lit candle and they reach over and then they light that person's corresponding candle around that problem and they fix it. Well, now there's more light in the world. So if you sell software and a business is struggling to keep track of, their inventory and all the things they do, and you solve that problem, then you've lit their candle. So now they have light in that area where the problem was. And in return, you've gotten compensation for it. And so some people just look at, and this is the way my dad was, it's like, wow, I need to take my candle and light as many other candles as I can, because then we got more light for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a worldview approach. And so in the culture wars, or whatever you want to call it, when you talk about a victim mentality, so there's kind of two predominant thought lines. The victim thought line is, you know what? You've been screwed. Mm-hmm. It's not your fault. Of course you are where you are. And it's never going to change until we change the system.
World's out to get me.
You're owed.
Yeah.
Right. And you should have a chip on your shoulder. And then there's the other school of thought of, hey, you may not be responsible or at fault for what happened to you, because life is unfair. I mean, Dad was born during, with the Great Depression. His dad died when he was 5. He had to go to work when he was 6. Didn't do well in school. And those are his family was the second poorest family in Yazoo City, Mississippi. those are some pretty serious check marks against you. But one day somebody poured into him and said, you know what? If you believe in yourself and go to work on a regular schedule, you can be a champion. And they didn't say, you know, give up. It's not your fault. It's insurmountable. They said, yeah, life is unfair, but you can change who you are and where you are and what you accomplish by changing what goes into your mind. Mm-hmm. And so I reflect on that because I mean, I've been asked a question in different ways on stage where somebody says, yeah, but what about me? Look at my circumstance. And so how do you give direction to somebody who's been dealt a terrible hand?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you want the best for them. And so the best for them is you can't downplay, oh, just get over it. You could, you know, people do it all the time. Just suck it up. That's not the right answer. Just like, yeah, it's terrible. Just be resigned to it. It's not fair. Somebody's going to have to save you. Guess what? That's not the right answer. And so I play in that kind of that perfect middle ground, which says, hey, you don't have control of what happened to you, but you do have control of everything you decide right now. Mm-hmm. You can do something right now that will take you closer to your why, your purpose, your goals, your dreams, your aspirations. And it starts with making that choice and determining what you've got to develop in yourself to get there.
Yeah.
And what you'll find is many of the greatest successes in life, they didn't start off with everything in their favor. They had to make that choice, and then that created gratitude and motivation to keep going because they knew what it was like on the other side. They didn't like it.
Yeah.
Right. So the victim thing is really tough, and it's never to discount that people have had horrible things happen. It's also not to discount that there still are things that aren't right that we can go and fix because we got to go do that. But at the same time, if your standard is personal truth, then that gives moral justification to a dictator bully.
Yeah. Because
they're just living out their personal truth. But on the other hand, if you say there's a higher truth that we all have to abide by, a moral standard or code that we have to live by, then that creates some pretty good rails on the road that keep us in.
Yeah.
And we know when people go outside the rails because there's death and destruction outside the rails.
Well, you said the word boundaries earlier, and I mention this consistently. It's just one that I think it sticks with me because I don't like it. It's one of those that you read it and find out it's true, but I don't like it. And it was the old study of putting kids on a little playground in this massive field, no boundaries, and how the kids just stuck close to the playground and the teachers. And so then they went and put a fence pretty far out, but put a fence around that. As soon as they did that, the kids branched out and went to the far perimeters, went way out there. And it was this, mind-boggling thing of we do want boundaries. We don't like limitlessness. Kind of like the Zig Ziglar aspect of, if you think that you can be, if you buy into the thing, hey, you think positive, you can do anything. You can be anything. That's overwhelming. It blows. I don't want that. Help me understand me and my propensities, giftings, talents, skills, abilities, and where I'm going to be best suited. And let's look in that frame. That's why I like personality profiles. It helps us understand ourselves, and it kind of narrows down the playing field. Well, it does from the anything, but then it gives us this big scope of, man, here are all the areas that you could apply yourself, effectively, that we do like boundaries, the right ones, the right boundaries, healthy boundaries. And you said a minute ago, Tom, worldview, and that's really where I came to. And that's what Jordan's perspective is what is your worldview? I don't think he even used the word worldview. I don't think he used the word boundaries. I mean, we're using a lot of words around what he did. Some of his words, I had to figure out what he was talking about. He's a smart dude, but it is what is our worldview and how is that impacting us? And he was really talking at a cultural aspect too. How's that impacting our culture and how are we engaging? How are we joining and waving the flag of oppression? Victim. He didn't use that word either. He spoke to it a lot, but he didn't use that specific word. I don't know if there were reasons he was trying not to use some of these loaded words that we have, maybe because he knows there's so much baggage. He was trying to use different words, but that's what he was dancing around, I think. And what is that world view and what is your attitude about that? And it comes back just to the key of attitude of whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And it did. I mean, he was very gracious, and it wasn't the aspect of, hey, just look at the things that are doing bad and just give them a free pass. I'm saying that again. And it wasn't to do that. And to some degree, he said, and if you really do feel like there is literal bad things happening, what are you then doing and committing to be part of the change to help that happen? Or are you, and then this is my paraphrasing, just sitting back and complaining and griping and criticizing, and back to Shanti, the opposite of kindness, which is just tearing you down, tearing me down. So how do we look at that? But I appreciated him making the case, like you talked about, that he's so good at, again, the math doesn't work. And you can, if you want to, hear his perspective on it, we're sitting here talking about it, but you can, type in, it's literally the first chapter of his book. And Tom, you asked me, you said, hey, you're going to have Jordan on the show. I haven't even asked. I honestly have not invested in him a ton. I do have his book, and I kind of audited that a little bit, but I'm interested in him he's developed himself, or he has, that's not true. Our culture has developed it and is into an icon. And that's interesting. Why? That's what I was curious about. That's why I really went. Why is that? And I think he's pretty sobering. He's not, let me look at podcasts. So he's got a huge podcast. And we know that the most popular podcasts on planet Earth are entertainment, period. You want a lot of people on there talk about crime and sex. I mean, that is the way to get a lot of downloads. If you go look at iTunes or wherever you listen, look at the top podcasts, it's entertainment. And the top 20 are primarily, it takes a long while to get to one that's actually about personal development or business development or education or health and wellness. And then you'll see a couple big ones, celebrity names pop up there. The Dave Ramsey show, something like that'll pop up there, but it's mainly entertainment. He does have a really big show, and he is not a very funny guy. He's not, I wouldn't call him entertaining. He's interesting. It's curious. And he's obviously striking a chord with people. I think it is his, a sobering perspective on some of our volatility in the culture that people are drawing to. And it was literally fans, Tom. I mean, they were fans. These weren't just people like me who were just interested in it. They were hooting and hollering like he was some political candidate they were about to vote for. And, again, interesting, but that was to me, it just stands out that he spent 75 minutes or so probably on a monologue. And that's all he covered was, again, that aspect of do not carelessly denigrate social institutions. And then he did a Q&A, and he only got through 4 questions on Q&A. You talked about parenting. There was one, maybe it was on marriage that he hit. Like, how do you forgive a partner who's been, I don't think they even use the word infidelity, but that's what he talked about. How do you regain trust? And it was interesting. People just want to hear that. Yeah, again, I'll say a sobering perspective on the real things that we're dealing with. But this one just stuck out to me because, I mean, it was his focus. And then again, I saw the post about you. The way you see people is the way you treat them. And I think I take it further, and it's the way that you feel about yourself and your worldview. If you hear somebody who's critical, they're a victim of other people, that's their perspective, and they are hurting themselves, as opposed to saying what you just did. Can't control that. We're sure not minimizing. I sure don't want to minimize anybody's struggle, because especially me, I'm an incredibly privileged human and have lived a privileged life. So it's not to minimize that, but we still do have control over how we react. And back to you look at the bookshelf behind me and behind you, it's amazing how the vast majority of those, probably 80% or more, are people who came from every reason not to be on that bookshelf.
Yeah. So you said that he said, if you look at that as somebody and you say, well, that's success,
Yeah.
then what is your definition of success? So what's the definition of success that he was driving at? Or did he just leave that for each person to decide?
He left it up, but obviously was poking at if our definition is winning, period. He even used the example, Tom, of that we can all probably relate to, the make-believe kid, let's say on the soccer field, who's just awesome, especially at a younger age. You can have some kids really outshine the other. So you got some 9-year-old kid, man, and he's just leaps and bounds above everybody else. And his team wins because of him. And so I see that. I've got kids young kids playing sports and playing literally soccer. And you can have one kid, and at the young age, early on, man, they can make the team win. And it seems like that seems great, right? If you're that kid's parents, you should just be stoked about that. He gets the ball, he keeps the ball, and he scores, and the team wins. But that's the math that we're supposed to go after, right? That's success. And he's saying, but we all know how often that story gets turned around, and we have to talk to the kid and go, man, winning is great, but it's not everything. And it also matters how you play the game. And if you're not including your teammates, if you're not a good winner, just like a good loser, it's important. So we hear that talked about, and it kind of goes back again to that. Yeah. Success. Is it just winning? So if somebody's out there, so name your person who you are upset about in the corporate world or in the political sphere, who you feel like is this oppressive, power mongering, evil, even, person. Are they really winning? Yeah. That's where he did leave it. And then I literally said, Tom, if that's how you feel, I question your definition of, I think he said maybe both, of winning and success. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Yes. That's an interesting thing. And I can't remember if it's Jordan Peterson or someone else, but they talked about Canadian hockey players.
Well,
And
he's Canadian, so we'll say that he did it.
Something like 63% of professional hockey players in Canada are born in the first 4 months of the year.
Okay.
But there is no genetic reason why that should happen, right? You should have 8 or 9% of all professional hockey players born in each month. But the way they have the league set up is, if you're born in that time frame, that means you're on the older end,
right
of that league that you're playing in. And older means bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Older means more, generally speaking, more fundamentally dexterously sound, right? You've got more hand-eye coordination. You're more coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're more coordinated and bigger, that means you get more playing time. And if you get more playing time, that means that your skills get refined at a higher rate than the kids who get less playing time, which means that you're more likely to be selected for an all-star team.
Yeah.
Which means that you're more likely to get more one-on-one skills coaching and development, and more playing time and more games. And when you multiply that over 10 years of development, somebody born in the right window from an age perspective has a significant mathematical advantage over somebody who's the youngest in the league.
Yeah.
Who's the smallest, who hasn't caught up. And so that's a system, right? The age group system in leagues benefits those kids who happen to be at the older side of the age spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why if you come to Texas, especially where football is everything in small towns, very common for sons to be held back a year. Not because the teachers say academically they can't do it. It's because everybody looks at each other and says, I'd rather them graduate as an 18-year-old going for a college scholarship than a 17-year-old, because they got one more year of development. And so that's how systems that make sense create inequities along the way. And so as a political science and economics, political science major in college, and economics underneath that, and history, I've looked at the historical and economic definition of success. So here's a really weird thought problem that I did when we went to war in Iraq. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is the economic political definition of success? Is it child mortality? Is it availability of healthcare? Is it the average age of people, lifespan? Is it a GDP number that per person that the country puts out? Is it the percentage of people who are in middle class? And so here's an interesting thing. The war in Iraq was horrific, and there's a lot of reasons that I question it. But the interesting thing is that Saddam was in power, I think, 23 years prior to the war. And depending on who you believe, he killed anywhere from 1 million to 3 million Iraqis, the Kurds, through starvation, all these different things. I mean, genocide, just to maintain his power. And so we go in, and the war comes in. And so I just did it. I said, well, success is how many people died needlessly in a regime. Okay. So he was killing over 100,000 people a year on average. I mean, he went to war with Iran, and they both lost millions of people, or a big number. I don't know what it was. It was a lot. Okay. And so we come in and we go to war, and a lot more people die. But we went from killing, 100,000 a year to 30,000 a year. Well, isn't that success? Well, not if you're the one killed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But the thing is it's so arbitrary, because how do we define success? And a lot of people say, well, ultimately, success is just given freedom. To me, success is the freedom to do what I want, when I want, with who I want. And if there are casualties along the way, but I get that freedom, then that's okay.
Yeah.
Other people say, no, success is average lifespan. As long as that's going up, regardless of the authoritarian rules that we put in place, then we're winning. So you got this challenge that goes back and forth. Then I talk about, or I have talked about, the geography of compassion.
Yeah.
So if somebody ends up in the ER from a car accident, they got a broken leg, and it's going to cost $100,000 to fix it. In the US, we're going to do it, right? That person's going to get fixed. It doesn't matter if they're illegal or illegal, or a citizen, or have insurance or don't have insurance. That hospital's doing the surgery. But what would happen if the doctor who's about to do the surgery, if they said, hey, you know what, instead of fixing this person's leg, we'll just send the same amount of money to a third world country, and that'll save 10,000 lives, because we can purify the water and take care of malaria. Are you going to deny that person the fix of the leg so that 10,000 people that you don't know can live? I mean, we think about it being hypothetical, but those are numbers.
Yeah. And
that's where all this challenge comes into play is, and I just go back to I don't know if it's the starfish or the sand dollar.
Yeah. Both. It literally is you can find equal stories on both of those topic or subjects.
And the story is granddad and grandson are walking on the beach, and there's thousands of these, we'll call them starfish. They've washed up, and they're gasping for air, and they need the water. And so the granddad's picking them up, throwing them in. back in the water. And the grandson says, what are you doing? And he says, well, they'll die if they're not back in the water. And the grandson says, but granddad, there's thousands of them. What difference does it make? And the granddad picks up one more, throws it in and says, well, to this one, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the ultimate simple story of how do we make sense of this? Because if nothing matters and we're victims, then why bother? Just let all the starfish die.
Yeah.
Or we could say, you know what? I can't do much about what's happening out there, but whenever I see a starfish, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make a difference.
Yeah.
And ultimately what that means to me is you've got to develop into a more capable person tomorrow than you are today to handle more starfish.
More capable. And I was to say more positive. Again, coming back to if I was trying to encapsulate his message, it was, again, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions. Check your attitude. Is it really pan out? Are they really evil, bad, oppressing power mongers who are, quote, winning, successful? Check that, one. And then two, just to what you said, Tom, check what are you doing to help? What are you doing to help? Sitting back and complaining, what we've got this cultural wave of right now, which just feels increasingly blaming and finger pointing and disparaging and criticizing, is just not helping. So how can we help ourselves, help the problem? Yeah, it was a good topic, man. That's why I was eager to talk about it with you, because I know it's something that's on your heart. And political, that was his first degree, political science. Just so you know, you guys are kindred spirits there. Of course, then he went on to get, like, I think every degree that there is. So yeah, there you go. All right, brother. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand about 1% of what he says.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the reason that he's such a lightning rod is this. I was thinking about it as you were talking about him, is people have a thirst for the truth. And the truth is very controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a way of sharing truth. So I'm not going to say the truth. I'm just going to say truths in certain areas that get both ends of that spectrum really agitated.
Mm-hmm.
People who are seeking the truth go, wow, that makes sense. And people who disagree with that as the truth, they can't be quiet. They have to stand up, they have to give their version of the truth. And so he gets both sides going. And so that's a superpower, I think.
It is. And I think it's, again, on this topic of denigrating is, what do we feel so threatened by? I found myself there more and more, Tom. What am I in this debate or this argument or this controversy? What am I threatened by? Let me take that into account first. And then again, back to the, who is winning. And I have heard him talk on, the aspect just of how we view our side, our truth, that by proxy, if we feel truth here, that somebody who opposes it or seems on their side does not know the truth and they're evil. And again, we're back to this perspective, and I'm going to bring it back just us. What is it doing to us? What is it doing to the spirit, to our spirit, to the spirit of our communities? And how are we helping the matter?
Amen.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, brother.